All right, welcome everyone. I'm Jessica McQuain. I'm usually behind the scenes doing tech and checking my email to make sure no one at the last minute needs the Zoom link. Dr. Simon couldn't be here with us tonight, so I'm going to kick us off. We have wrapped up a really busy year for our events. Thanks so much. We appreciate all the support we've had throughout the year. And it looks like my connection's unstable. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sometimes every once in a while I miss a
Okay.
word. Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead and kick it off to Bruce to discuss this month's this discussion pick.
Okay. And my only announcement is uh we will keep doing this in some fashion this fall, next year, and I am collecting um suggestions about what we should read. And I've already got more suggestions than we could. I've already got a lot of suggestions about what I should do with with Flannery O'Connor. Any additional suggestions anybody wants to throw into the hopper? Hey, just email me. You all know how to contact me. Bruce.gentry@gcsu.edu. They're not taking my email address away from me. And we'll have big fun um, next in the fall. We'll probably pick up again in August, and I will, we'll send out announcements about the schedule as soon as we've got it figured out, and we'll do something short and easy for August so that people aren't scrambling. Okay, tonight we're talking about an introduction to the introduction to a memoir of Mary Ann, and I have not usually assigned this essay in my O'Connor course. Um, I've always kind of made it optional for people to read any of the essays. And I found over the years that my students were not particularly interested in talking about the essays. They always wanted to get back to the fiction. So I find I'm taking notes and jotting down ideas about something I've read many times and seen quoted back at me in many articles, but that I hadn't really worked over at great length. I find myself a little bit surprised sometimes by what I find myself thinking when it comes to this essay. Uh, I think my theme is something along the lines of Flannery was wrong when she said that this essay was crucial to understanding her. We'll see how you feel when I get through with it, or when we get through with our discussion. Feel free to jump in, use the chat. I haven't turned on the chat, but I should. Um, and I, and I assume Jessica will be watching the chat along with everything else she's doing, so that we don't miss somebody who's trying to make a comment or ask a question or whatever. Flannery did say that anybody who wants to understand her needs to read everything she's written. Good luck with that. And especially this essay. So, it has a special place. It's because of that comment that I decided to put it um, on the list of discussion topics for this year. Well, of all the essays, this is one that she thought was a really important deal. So let's give it a try. I would say she starts out the essay sounding like Flannery O'Connor, and then it kind of drifts off. And by the end, I'm not sure who this person is who's talking to me. And one of my opinions about this is that some of what she says and some of what is most quoted out of this essay is almost irrelevant to the fiction. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but keeps me going. She starts off talking about how it's hard to write about good little boys and girls. It's easier to write about bad little boys and girls. Okay, that sounds like Flannery. That sounds true. That she's good at talking about uh, quirky kids who misbehave some, and the misbehavior is some of what makes the characters interesting. The sense that they're not, kind of average good little kids, if that category exists, makes a lot of her characters seem more interesting. And then I think Flannery, because she's writing this for, um, the book by Nuns, or maybe because she is facing a serious philosophical religious problem when she contemplates the situation of Marianne Long, pushes herself, good for you, Flannery, pushes herself into thinking about things where I don't think she's entirely comfortable. And she says things that I want to pick a fight with her about. Um, and I I respect her for not playing it safe and for um, digging in and for challenging herself, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with it, you know. And so it's kind of fun to um, start picking fights with Flannery at my advanced age. Okay, it's fun. I'm almost tempted to assign people to read The Birthmark, next year, because it's such an interesting story and it's so applicable to Flannery O'Connor, and she talks about it, at some length in this essay. Okay, so stop me when you've had enough of this. She loved Nathaniel Hawthorne. She she said he was one of her models, that she was trying to write things that were like um, what Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote, things that weren't quite realistic, but went for a larger truth, the truth of the human heart that realism has a hard time grasping. She said she wrote romances, and she was thinking of Hawthorne when she said that. Her excuse for bringing up Hawthorne is that Hawthorne's daughter founded the order that started the cancer home in Atlanta next to the old Braves Stadium um, downtown. And as far as I know, the cancer home is still there. And she liked Hawthorne so much that I suspect that the name Una in Why Do the Heathen Rage, that manuscript, comes from the other daughter of Hawthorne, and that Flannery just was always looking for how she could bring up Hawthorne. She's got a little discussion of the birthmark in here. And I think if you've read the birthmark, if you think about the birthmark a little bit, you will realize that it just spins off all sorts of interesting connections to Flannery. Not that she brings them up all that directly. I mean, okay, let's start here. The reading she gives of the birthmark is simple. She's not giving us a sophisticated analysis of Nathaniel Hawthorne's story. She says, this is a story about a bad guy who sees imperfection in his wife and wants to kill it. And so he kills her. The end. Well, that's true. That's kind of the basic plot of the birthmark. But, if you want to have your brain scrambled, go reread the birthmark thinking about what the rest of what's in this essay and Flannery O'Connor's career and how she feels about herself and Hawthorne and her lupus uh, and the connections are all over the place. The story is more complicated than she makes it in her essay. Let's start with this. Aylmer, the bad guy in The Birthmark, is a version of Hawthorne. And you can make a case for Aylmer, even though he kills his wife. You can make a case for Aylmer as admirable in his ambition to try to push the envelope, to do things that nobody's ever done before. His wife in the story, who dies as a result, says she loves that about him. That's what she most admires, is that he's not satisfied with doing what can be done. Hi, Heidi. That she wants him to do more than is possible. See the connection? Flannery O'Connor is talking about her, could have been talking about herself here. She's talking about a literary situation, somebody tries to do the impossible and won't succeed necessarily, but it's still honorable to try. Hawthorne is Aylmer. His villain is him. Now, that complicates things, and that's not exactly in Flannery's essay. But you just think about it and you say, okay, that's interesting, and it's relevant to Flannery. That, this is Flannery who went to the priest and said, I'm afraid that I'm playing with fire when I write these stories and I'm going to corrupt somebody's soul and maybe I shouldn't write. And the priest said, don't worry, just go write a good story. But, when she went to the priest, she was open to the possibility that he was going to say, yeah, maybe you shouldn't write things like that. Or maybe you should write about nicer people. Maybe he would have agreed with Regina. What would she have done then? She got lucky. Or maybe she knew which priest she was going to with this question, and she got the answer she wanted, which was keep writing your weird stories and just make sure they're good stories. And we don't have to worry about whether somebody is corrupted by them. It's probably because they're going to misread if that happens. And it's not something for you to worry about. So Flannery is like Hawthorne in lots of ways. She is like Aylmer. She is like the villain of the story, and she knows it. Okay. There's another feature of The Birthmark, which is that the wife who gets killed at a certain point starts getting on the bandwagon. She wants her birthmark, which is a little picture of a hand on her cheek. She wants it removed. She says, she'd rather die than not have that birthmark removed. She pushes him in the direction that he started going, and to fatal ends. Now, I don't know that it makes any difference. I think he probably still would have done what he did to his wife, even if she hadn't been going for it. But these are both people who have these in the Hawthorne story. These are both people who have really strong reactions to this birthmark. A little grotesquerie on the side of the face. Okay, and ties in with Marianne Long if you're reading the introduction by Flannery. There's another character in The Birthmark. This is a mad scientist story, and there is a mad scientist's assistant named Aminadab in the Hawthorne story. Aminadab loves The Birthmark. He doesn't agree with Aylmer, and he doesn't agree with Georgiana. He just says, boy, I love that. And it complicates everything. Oh, so gee, you could love the grotesque. And it's in the Hawthorne story. It's not that the grotesque is immediately horrifying or naturally horrifying. There are different reactions to it. And Flannery says in the essay that, you know, the grotesque is the good under construction. She says she's pro grotesque, that there's good in the grotesque. She doesn't get into the details about the character in the story who talks that way. I don't know why not. Um, at the end, part of what I love about the birthmark is that at the end of the story, as Georgiana is dying, there's laughter. And every time I read the birthmark, I kind of change my mind about who's laughing. Is it Aylmer? Because he really wanted to kill his wife all along. And even though he says he's trying to remove the birthmark, maybe he wanted to remove his wife. And he's somehow giddily happy that he's finally done the evil thing he was plotting all along. Uh, or is it Aminadab? Why would he laugh if he loved the birthmark and the birthmark was killed? I mean, was done away with. Possible explanation. He's so glad to see his boss get his comeuppance and fail that he's laughing at Aylmer at the end of the story. The only thing I can rule out is that Georgiana is laughing. No, she's dead. I'm not going there. But the motives of the characters are all very complicated. What does it all add up to? Everybody has strong reactions to the grotesque. They don't really admit fully to themselves or others how they feel about the grotesque. And it's very powerful stuff. We're all playing with fire. People could get killed with um, this grotesque stuff that's floating around in the story. Flannery brings it up just long enough to say, Aylmer's bad. But boy, that Hawthorne, he's a great writer. I want to write like him. And now let's change the subject. So she opens the can of worms and puts it in her essay so that somebody like me who wants to, you know, dig around in the can of worms can do so. And then she changes the subject. And I'm very glad, I'm very glad she talks about what she talks about with Hawthorne because it's relevant to Flannery too. She's got that whole thing about him going to the poorhouse and seeing the little kid who is in a really bad way and an extremely unpleasant looking child. And he is repulsed by the child and he just can't maintain his rejection of that child and he finally picks it up and caresses it. And Flannery is almost effusive in her praise of Hawthorne for being touchy-feely. Good for you, Hawthorne. I know it doesn't come to you naturally, but you were nice to somebody even though they were grotesque. Okay, I get that. I believe that. I think that's how she really feels. It's personally relevant, isn't it? I've been hearing people beat up Flannery O'Connor for decades now because she's unloving. All she does is express how she hates people. She's mean, she's mean, she's mean. She's cold, cold, cold. Well, this essay is Flannery's indirect way of saying, I can talk about it with Hawthorne more easily than I can talk about it with myself. Yeah, it's a problem. Um, and she's kind of saying, yes, it's something I too need to work on. Did she ever? Did Flannery O'Connor ever think that she managed to do what she praises Hawthorne for having accomplished when he wrote his memoir about visiting the poorhouse? I mean, you could answer that question with a no. You could say, well, this is Flannery kind of admitting that she wishes she could do more than she thinks she ever got around to doing on the subject of love. Uh, and that's a big complicated topic. And I could make the case that there is love, that there's plenty of love in Flannery O'Connor. But I know there are a lot of people who disagree totally about that and think that that's the big lack, that that's the big piece that's missing from her psychology, her worldview, um, that the the closeness to other people is never quite believable in O'Connor. And I think at the very least we can say, well, this is an essay in which Flannery is um, thinking about that, acknowledging that there's a problem, that there's an issue here, and 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 I don't know that she gives us an answer. She just says, well, okay, and I can agree with her. Anybody who's going to take Flannery O'Connor seriously needs to think about the ways in which maybe she didn't accomplish everything she was trying to accomplish, the ways in which, like Aylmer, she's trying to do the impossible. And how do we feel about somebody who's trying to do the impossible when, oh my God, they don't manage to do the impossible? Um, I think part of what I like about Flannery O'Connor is that she seems to me to be so ambitious and uh, compared to other writers. And I don't expect her to you know solve every problem of life and solve every problem of how to write a story. I just like watching her. I like watching her struggle. I like watching her try, and I think I give her lots of credit for thinking about her problems as a writer and encouraging other people to think about her problems. I think that's what she's doing when she writes this essay and tells people anybody who's going to understand me has to look at that essay. Uh,
Heidi points out in the chat
yeah.
the connection with Hawthorne's daughter Rose starting the monastery that founded that cancer home where
Started
Marianne was.
the order that did this, and I think that was perfect for getting this essay rolling and perfect for making Flannery take it seriously. That maybe she should talk to these nuns. That, oh my God, this has got a connection to Hawthorne, my hero, and so I'll have this conversation. When I finally sat down and read A Memoir of Marianne, I said, gee, I'm really surprised Flannery O'Connor decided to write the introduction to this thing. I guess they sold some copies and made some money off of it, but so what? It ain't great prose. Uh, it has all the problems that Flannery says in the introduction are in the manuscript that she read. I think it just provoked her enough so that she said, well, this is worth thinking about and worth writing about, even though the rest of the book is is not so hot. And okay. And so she brings up Hawthorne, and I think she could have written a book about Hawthorne. And there's a lot more to say. That's right. And there were she didn't think it would get published. That was part of the negotiations. And where was it? I was reading when I reread Brad Gooch's biography, I think was where I ran across it. Marianne Long's family sued over the book after it came out. They thought that their privacy had been invaded, and that money was being made off of them. Um, and it was settled. Nothing ever came of it. The nuns didn't get sued, but it's all very sensitive stuff, and there's lots of room here to be offensive, to go too far with something. Speaking of going too far, if you have volume 11 of the Flannery O'Connor Review, you can dig it out and see pictures of Marianne Long, I hesitated not very long in putting photos of the little girl into the magazine. The tumor is bigger than her head. And they covered it up with bandages, but she looks like this child with a very small head and this gigantic tumor on her face. It's much worse than you would imagine from reading the essay. And of course, who would, I mean, I hesitated for a second after seeing these photos. Should these really be published? I mean, they were donated by Damien Farron's priest to special collections at Georgia College. And I said, thank you very much for giving us these photos. They're amazing. And then I thought, are we gonna publish these? Well, as soon as I had a chance, that's what I did. Yes. Oh, okay. So good. That's probably good. That Damien is still glad he did it, I think, and still honoring the the work of the people at the cancer home. Moving right along, unless somebody has something else they want to say about Hawthorne, one can talk for a long time about the complexities. The thing about Hawthorne, he's like Flannery. You look at it and you read it and you say, oh, that's kind of simple, that's kind of clear. And then the more you pick at it, the more complicated everything gets in that story. I think they really are, allies in the world of fiction. There are lots of things that you can talk about in this essay. Sue, are you
I
raising?
I am. I couldn't find the little hand on there, but now it's there. So um I just wanted to say I think the steps that are being taken here are very interesting because I spent some time in Hawthorne's journals and the diatribes that he lays out, especially against Margaret Fuller. I think about how he knows that much of what he's saying and thinking he shouldn't be. And
Hmm,
so he masks these things by the found narrative approach. There was a man, but it was really him. Um, and so it takes his wife to reveal that this was in his journal. So it's a kind of virtue signaling that that's happening. Oh, look what I'm a decent human being because I was brought into this, which is something Flannery will not do.
mhm,
In fact, she never really tells us anything about Marianne. It's not an introduction to Marianne, it's an introduction to the memoir, because I think that's probably her greatest fear, is that she would signal some kind of virtue of herself.
mhm. Yeah,
So,
I think that sounds good. I think that's right. What she doesn't talk about, you need to notice, all the ways that she could have gone with this essay. Hey, she could have talked about Marianne Long and given us a better picture of the little girl than we got from the nuns. But no,
mhm,
she decides she wants to try to do that. And as for all, she does say it's hard to write about nice children. And you do get the impression from a memoir of Marianne, she's probably a remarkably nice little girl.
mhm,
Uh, did live really well for as long as she lived, with the fact that she had this giant tumor on her face. And it's, kind of mind-boggling, and everybody should think about Marianne Long. It just seems like that's good for the soul to think about that. And yeah, and Hawthorne is all mixed up in there. Okay. There are other things that you can talk about in this essay, and I hope people will bring them up when they're ready. I'm kind of ready to, because it's already 7:30, to jump to the end. Okay. because I promised I was going to disagree with Flannery. I don't like how the essay ends. I I say, ouch. I say, I don't agree with you, Flannery. And it's that paragraph that begins, one of the tendencies of our age is to use the suffering of children to discredit the goodness of God. And I can go through a lot of that and say, okay. It's the way that paragraph ends that makes me want to say, wait a minute, folks. In the absence of this faith from other ages, old-fashioned faith, now we govern by tenderness. It is a tenderness which, long since cut off from the person of Christ, is wrapped in theory. When tenderness is detached from the source of tenderness, its logical outcome is terror. It ends in forced labor camps and in the fumes of the gas chamber. To which I say, no. Stop it, Flannery. Maybe you believe that, and maybe you wanted to write it down, but don't put that in an essay and then turn around and tell me that I have to think about that and believe that to understand your fiction. That quote has never helped me with anything. Okay. I mean, I can agree that Flannery O'Connor has the best bullshit detector there ever was. She's ahead of Hemingway on her bullshit detector. If somebody's phony, if somebody doesn't really mean what they're saying, she's going to pick it up and she's going to let you know. And she is the most unsentimental writer ever. When I ask myself, why do I like Flannery O'Connor? That's one of my answers, is that I really like that she doesn't fall for anything, that she doesn't go for anything phony. But tenderness is killing people? Tenderness is causing the gas chamber? No. Okay. Now, I'm going to stop there and back off a little bit and say, now, if I could talk myself into the notion that the quote was relevant to understanding the fiction, I could swallow it and say, okay, if that's the belief that causes the fiction, yeah, I wanted to hear you say it. Okay, but one of my claims for the evening is I don't even think that's so. Well, let's get right to it. Where in Flannery O'Connor is there a character who discovers their commitment to Jesus and who therefore starts practicing genuine tenderness? I can't find it. And I went through all the fiction, making lists of characters. Where could this be? Hazel Motes? Okay, he finds Jesus at the end of Wise Blood, and what does he turn? He turns away from all earth human beings and becomes totally self-obsessed. Anything Mrs. Flood says to him about let's be nice to each other, he dismisses. If there's an insult he hadn't thought of, as soon as he thinks of it, he throws it at Mrs. Flood. Go away, go away. I want nothing to do with you. Get away from me with your tenderness. It's just me and Jesus now, and nobody else in the world matters. I find myself forgiving Hazel Motes for that attitude, but this is not genuine tenderness on display here. The grandmother at the end of A Good Man Is Hard to Find? yeah, maybe she's finding Jesus at the end of this story, but you know, she's saying what she's saying about Jesus is maybe he didn't raise the dead. The key moment where Flannery's telling us this is the right thing to say is not a religious statement. You're one of my babies, you're one of my own children. It's family connection, which might not have anything to do with religiosity, that is ever so effectively thrown at us at the end of that story. I got into a discussion one time with a brilliant student who said, Flannery wants us to think that's religious, but it's not. It's just about feeling like a mother. And Flannery's pulling a switcheroo on us at the end of the story. And I found I didn't really have a very good answer to that semi complaint about the end of A Good Man is Hard to Find. Old Tarwater? What's his real feeling towards Tarwater? Does he really love that little boy? Or is he just looking for somebody who's going to give him the kind of burial he wants? And, you know, raising him up in his prophet role for that reason, it seems to me, even though Flannery said she was 1,000% on his side, that we could see him as not particularly loving. His religiosity, which I believe is totally genuine, has not led him in that direction. Mr. Head, you know, there's that page that was added on to the end of the artificial N-word so that Flannery could spell out a revelatory come to Jesus moment at the end of that story. Has it made him love people? I would say no. He's not as obnoxious as Hazel Motes, but he's pretty inner directed too. And I don't think that, you know, his heart is flowing with fellow feeling for other people at the end of that story. Even I was talking about a fifth example today at the book club at Eatonton, and I said, and Revelation. Do you think after Mrs. Turpin has her come to Jesus moment at the end of that story, which is, I think, as clear as it could possibly be, a come to Jesus moment, she's going to be nicer to people the next day? I mean, I think the next time she sees the black workers on the farm, she's going to fall right back into condescending talking at them the way she always has. She can't break out of that. And her religious moment has not led her toward genuine tenderness. Okay. Now, Flannery doesn't say in this passage that if you find Jesus, you will be loving towards other human beings. She just kind of implies it by saying, well, if you're not, you know, totally tied to Jesus, then your tenderness is totally phony and it's no good to anybody. You are actually committing the Holocaust. And Flannery has done a lot of thinking about the Holocaust. That's not a flip comment. She has read up on that topic. She's thought about it a lot of time. She's mentioned it in her fiction in various ways. This is not a trivial thing. She's playing a trump card there. And I'm just wanting to change the rules of the card game at that point and saying, no, this isn't quite right. Okay, let's talk about more things that are wrong with this passage. Are there characters who seem to be religious, but it doesn't lead them toward genuinely religious, but it doesn't lead them toward any niceness towards other people? I mean, I gave those examples, but it still feels like there are other characters who are kind of in a special category. And I think, let's see, who did I put in this category? Mr. Shiflett, who's always talking about religion. Rufus in The Lamb Shall Enter First. Checks every box. He believes every fundamentalist thing he can think of to say he believes it. And what good has it done them? It leads them towards horrible acts. or at least it doesn't stop them. I don't know that I would say that, for Mr. Shiflett to talk about religion makes him say, oh, it'll be a really good idea to abandon Lucy Nell Crater in some place in Alabama, so she'll never get home. I wonder sometime whether Rufus's commitment to Jesus makes him a murderer. That's why that story makes me so uncomfortable. That is such a painful, masterful story. It's a wonderful story, but painful is that it seems to me to be saying that Rufus is just made worse by being armed with Jesus as a hammer he can use to beat up on Shepherd in that story. Okay, let me turn it around another way. Are there any characters who are good, but without any particular endorsement by Flannery O'Connor of their religiosity? And I would say, yeah. How about the mothers in The Enduring Chill and The Comforts of Home? The mother in The Enduring Chill does not understand why Asbury wants a priest. And the priest criticizes her and tells her she's wrong in 6 ways. And she gets a lot of abuse in the course of the story. But I think the story as a whole implies that she did the right thing. She put up with a lot of crap from her son and did the things that need to be done so that everybody realizes he's going to live at the end. And she coddles him in some ways. I think I come out of that story feeling pretty good about Asbury's mother. What's her religious stance? She's vaguely Protestant, and the story beats her up for not being a good Catholic. Okay, how do you reconcile that with, this passage, which seems to be kind of insisting upon a particular strict Catholicism? That's how I'm reading that passage. And then the other one would be the mother in The Comforts of Home, who is ridiculed throughout the story by her son, who says, true religion tells me that what you're doing is wrong, 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 mother. And Flannery has that letter. You can disagree with whether Flannery was telling the truth when she wrote the letter. She says that the mother's position is the right one in that story. Even though within the story, we're being told that something like Flannery's religious standards, if they're brought up in the course of the story, just point out how far Mama is away from having the right commitments. I go back to this passage and read it again, and at the end of A Memoir of Marianne, and I say, no, these don't. This quote about the gas chamber, this helps me not one bit. Okay, now, am I attacking Flannery O'Connor? Just a little bit. For the most part, I said, okay, this is how she really believes. I mean, this is stuff she believes. I can't imagine Flannery O'Connor writing this and not saying, do I really want to write this? Do I really want to write this? This is going to be published in this book. And I'm going to tell everybody that this is really important understanding. And I think she believes it. And I think at the same time, Flannery O'Connor is confronting the big gap between her ultimate beliefs and what she's able to write. And it's okay by me if there's a big gap. It's okay by me if she contradicts herself. I just quibble with the idea that she's presenting this essay as the skeleton key to her works. No, I'm more with her when she's talking about Hawthorne, and we're talking about how difficult it is to be a writer and how you try to do things and it's not going to work and it might backfire. It is Hawthorne who talked about how you could commit the unforgivable sin by judging your characters too severely and thinking you really understand them and you can make a final judgment about the state of their souls, which O'Connor knew she did all the time. You know, she knew she got real close to committing what Hawthorne taught her was the unforgivable sin about being too judgmental. She's writing an essay about, okay, let's try to question our own judgments of people. Let's look at Hawthorne with that little kid he finds totally disgusting and praise him for being nice to the little kid. Okay, this all bounces back on Flannery. And you know, she's not saying I'm going too far when I write this passage about the gas chambers. She's just going too far. And in the context she's given us, I think I'm somehow justified in saying, hey, wait a minute. This is a bit too much for me. Okay, let me shift into a positive mode. I praise Flannery for confronting what she calls the ice in the blood and saying, okay, let's talk about my problems. I'm not very loving. And it gets into my fiction. And is there any way to forgive me? Is there any way for me to give myself for being so mean to people when I write about them? Is there a way for me to forgive myself for being so judgmental? She brings up Hawthorne, and he's taught us all that being judgmental is a bad, 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 bad thing. I want to, you know, I want to resolve my problems with this essay by saying Flannery somehow senses that she's guilty of everything she's complaining about, that everything points back to her. And she knows that, hey, why not here towards the end of my career, write an essay about what I can't do to my satisfaction. 1960, she's having, 60, 61 when she's writing this essay. I think she's having a lot of those thoughts with the conclusion of The Violent Bear It Away and her writer's block and her struggle with Why Did the Heathen Rage. I think she's having thoughts about, okay. And I haven't even gotten to the two worst offenders. If I imagine having a conversation with Flannery O'Connor and saying, okay, who are your best examples of fake tenderness, of people who think they're really good people and they're not, and it's all phony, and we need you to point that out to us. And I think her good answer would be Shepard and Rayber from The Lame Shall Enter First and The Violent Bear It Away, who both think they're generous to these little kids, but they kind of stand to the side as they get killed. And that doesn't look like genuine compassion if, death results. And both of these pieces of fiction by Flannery O'Connor are very complicated and very troubling. And I'm not sure if Flannery plays fair with either of those characters. Maybe Shepard, maybe she plays fair with Shepard, but that story is a real gotcha. If Hawthorne teaches that it's an unforgivable sin to, decide that somebody is damned and to spell it out, then maybe Flannery is going too far with The Lame Shall Enter First. That's the story where she admitted to John Hawkes. In this story, I'll admit that the devil's voice is my own. Discuss. How far do we agree with her that, yeah, this was really a kind of a devilish story. You're just showing off that you can do it. With Rayber in The Violent Bear It Away, I would say, okay, there's a reason she struggled with that novel. In the middle section, she rewrote and rewrote and rewrote for years and years and years. And she had the rest of the novel written, and she was still rewriting the middle section because she couldn't quite figure out what to do with Rayber. And I think part of her wanted to do the same thing she ended up doing with Shepard, to just totally condemn him. And the other side of her wanted to be fair to Raber and his worldview, so that she may have saved his soul by the end of that section, depending upon how you read it. The moment in The Violent Bear It Away that bothers me, where I feel like Flannery's not quite playing fair here with this character. It's a very particular moment that I don't know that it affects other people the way it affects me. When Raber and Tarwater go to see Lucette Carmody at the storefront church, and Raber's having a bad night because, the kids run away from him, and he goes into this storefront church, and Lucette Carmody condemns him and says, I see an evil man in front of me. He's not having a good evening. He's got a lot of stresses on him. And then they start home. They're walking home. He's with this kid who insults him all the time, who has run away, and he's had to go fetch him. And they're walking home, and the narrator says, if Raber had extended his hand to the little boy at this moment, it would have been accepted. Oh, okay. I saw Heidi waving goodbye. It would have been accepted. Everything would have been okay if, oh no, that's Charlotte saying goodbye. I'm sorry, it's not Heidi. I read the wrong name. If Raber had chosen to be nice to the little boy at this moment, everything would have been okay. I don't buy it. I mean, maybe it would have, but is this how we judge parenting? You got one chance on one night when you're at your worst, and everything depends upon you're doing the impossible in this circumstance? He has to be friendly too to this kid who's just been torturing him for pages and pages and pages of this novel. It just seems too much to demand. I don't think that Raber should only have one chance with Tarwater, and for the narrator to come out and say, okay, this is the moment in the entire novel when Raber could have turned around this whole relationship and he missed his chance, and that's it for him. It doesn't seem just basic fairness to me. And I can question Raber's compassion, because I share some of his faults here. I can say I love humanity, I just don't like individual human beings. That's a basic contradiction, and I share that with almost everybody. We can all say we love humanity, and we can be compassionate and tender, and then it gets down to cases, and we start thinking about what irritates us about somebody else's behavior, and that loving compassion fades a little bit. Okay. I mean, I can agree with Flannery's attack on tenderness. Sometimes she calls it compassion, up to a point, and then I question her, and I say and how I solve this for myself, how I keep going with my love of Flannery, is I say, well, the head who thinks she has to have ideas about her fiction is over here, and then the great writer is over here and does stuff that the thinker doesn't necessarily understand. Her writing self is the best part of her. And when she tries to explain her own fiction, it's not necessarily the greatest literary criticism. And I'm not going to give her too much grief for that. I'm going to give her a pass and say, it's okay, Flannery, for you to say things that are wrong about your own fiction. Just go back to writing fiction. When I'm reading this essay, An Introduction to a Memoir of Mary Ann, it's that rare situation where I find myself agreeing with Caroline Gordon, who told Flannery, maybe you've kind of overdone it with writing these essays. might not be good for your fiction, that you're sitting around thinking about stuff that way. And maybe you should just get back to, writing fiction full time and let go of this business of trying to explain it to people so much. I'm very glad I have the essays. Okay. I'm glad they're in Mystery and Manners. That was a find. That was a wonderful book to discover. And yet, it it has gaps. It has overreaches. It has fascinating flaws. And it sends me back to the fiction every once in a while to say, oh no, the fiction is more complicated than even Flannery says it is. And I wrap it all up for myself by saying, well, that's how we know she's a great writer. Is that, the fiction's so good that it goes beyond her own complicated, sophisticated attempts to explain it to herself. And okay, so I'm bibbled on at you, and I haven't paid any attention to the to what's in the chat. Can I ask people to volunteer and say to everybody out loud things that are in the chat? Heidi, why don't I just call on you? What what do you feel like sharing?
Well, you know, I've been trying to track down all the sisters who were in Flannery's life. So one of the sisters that came down in 1960 to visit Flannery at Andalusia in preparation for the writing of their book, it seems like, ended up into a pretty interesting mentor-mentee relationship. So a year after Flannery died in 65, she published an article called My Mentor, Flannery O'Connor, that was published in the Saturday Review. And I'll just share this much from the article. It's a quote that, again, this sister Mary Alice gave, and it's, "I'll take on criticizing your work," she had said soon after we met in 1960, "if you'll take on praying for mine." So I just wanted to share that. And then I also found a newspaper clipping that has a photo of Sister Mary Alice, and the article title is "Flannery O'Connor Helps Nuns Write Child Stories." And then it has a picture of the same nun who is proofing the book. So I just wanted to share that because I thought that was, again, it brings a little bit more like humanity to this whole collaborative work between Flannery and the sisters. It was not just a one-off. These people were in her life for the rest of her life, and I think made an impact on her. And clearly, at least for this sister Mary Alice, she made a pretty strong impact on her as well. That's
And
all.
yeah, and thank you. And Craig was responding to, I guess, your comment, what you were saying while you were saying it, that how much has there been written about the memoir rather than just the introduction? And I would say, hey, I managed to not feel too guilty about not having read a memoir of Mary Ann. I went for decades before I finally got around to reading, even though I owned a copy. And I think that's typical, is that I've read almost nothing about what's actually in the memoir. Uh, it's all about Flannery's intro, as if it had nothing to do with Mary Ann Long, as if it was all about Flannery's self-revelation and her understanding of herself, which I think is okay. It is about her. And it is about her more than it's about Mary Ann Long. I would love to know more about why her parents thought somebody should be sued over this book. I mean, it is like 100% in praise of Mary Ann Long. And why in the world would anybody object to this book being written about this child?
There's a little bit more about that because even Regina was looped in on that, and Regina was pretty upset because this was all coming in Flannery's last year of life. So there's a lot of stress that's happening at the same point. And there are some of the last letters that Flannery writes are her still expressing concern about how this might impact sisters and even her mom. So there is that. I think it was a little bit over money. Also, the Longs had another child who had cancer. They actually lived where in Tennessee, they lived a ways away. And I think there was a lot of guilt that they even had about having to give. They also had a lot of children, and poverty was a big concern for the Longs. So I think there was some guilt too of them kind of giving up this child who became famous, not under their care, but under the sisters' care. So it's all wrapped up in there.
Another whole, there's a whole story here, you know, that no, nobody's done. Somebody go write it, you know. Um, it's big and complicated, and it has to do with O'Connor and her self-image and how she read Hawthorne, and the reality of the Longs is hard to reconcile with what's in the book. You have to kind of go outside of the book and say, here's the rest of their life and why they could possibly feel that way. And yeah, it's begging for somebody to go do more with that. Anytime you start to think we finished saying what needs to be said about Flannery O'Connor, something like this will come along and say, oh, here's a whole new story to try to understand and write about with sensitivity. And y'all are pointing out things that, you know, I didn't know about this story, and I'm supposed to be keeping up, and I obviously haven't. Okay, I guess we're going to declare victory and moved on. And my understanding is that when we do the this is a question for Jess, that when the recording is made, is the chat part of what gets preserved?
The
Yes.
chat does get preserved, but I don't post it on YouTube.
But you could
So
find it.
I could find it, like I could email it to someone if they want some, some of the details from the chat, but it's not posted on our website or anything. But yeah, if you're trying to get links or anything like that, please let me know. I believe everyone should also be able to download the chat if you are familiar with that capability, save chat. Then you could save it for your own records as well. And we will be taking a little summer break. Some of us will be going to the conference in London, so if you'll be there, then we'll see you there, and we'll pick back up with our book club in the fall. If you're not on our email list and you would like to be, you can put your email in the chat and I will add you. Otherwise, keep an eye on our social media channels, and we'll post our fall schedule and all of our events for next year online. So,
As soon as possible.
yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good summer, folks. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, all.
All right, bye-bye. Okay.